All right, normally we're live on YouTube.
There we go.
All right, well, as you guys know, I'm Lucas Grandsire, of course, the one doing all the interviews on the channel. You can find my work on Flow Combat, on Twitter. I'm a little bit everywhere. And today in our first episode, I'm joined by my co-host now, Farah Hannoun. Farah, how are you?
I'm doing good, thank you. How are you, Lucas?
I'm doing well. And of course, where can we find your work and what's sort of going on right now?
Just under my name, really. Under Farah Hannoun, Twitter, Facebook. On Instagram, of course, I've got UFC News Alerts. That's kind of what I started out with. You can find all my interviews on my YouTube channel under my name as well, Farah Hannoun. Pretty much, yeah, interviews, fight announcements, and all that good stuff.
Of course, a lot of stuff going on. So let's hop right into it. We've obviously had a lot of news over these past couple of days, especially this weekend. I'm curious, did you get a chance to watch the Chuck versus Tito fight?
I did, not live, but I did. I tried to stay up for that. I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that fight happening in the first place. But it kind of ended the way I thought it would. To be honest, it's sad. A lot of people talking about how the fight shouldn't have been made. I agree as well. There is the argument of, yeah, Tito's also old. He's no spring chicken or anything like that. But at the same time, he's been active. He hasn't taken as much damage, in my opinion, as Chuck has over the course of his career. So we all know age is just a number in MMA. They are both old, but you look at a guy like Daniel Cormier. I mean, it's different. You got guys that are like 33 years old that can't really do it anymore and have taken a lot of damage. So yeah, they're both in their latter years, and people might argue for that. But there's a difference. You know, Tito's been active and not taking as much damage as I said. Chuck, it's sad, really. I just don't think that fight should have been made. What do you think?
I mean, obviously, I agree the fight shouldn't have been made. I think we proved it with a sad knockout over Chuck. One thing that is surprising me, though, is how well Tito is finishing off his career. I mean, he's 4-1. His one loss against Liam, if I remember correctly, it was so long ago. He's actually, I feel like he was winning the fight. So I'm surprised he's ended it so well because he's, what, in his 43? Well, he thinks he's 34, but I feel I'm surprised by how well he's finishing his career. But Chuck, on the other hand, I was hoping that maybe with 8 years off, perhaps his chin would have gotten better. Maybe he'd, heal up a little bit. But he looked bad. I was surprised he wasn't moving. It feels like his shoulders were stiff. I was surprised at how old he looked, and just I couldn't recognize Chuck Liddell out there. I wasn't happy with the booking, and I think we all knew it was going to end with a first round knockout with Chuck going down. I think we were just hoping it wasn't going to end that way.
Definitely. I mean, I understand why Tito wanted this fight. I know some people may not want to give him the credit and say because they're not in their prime and blah, blah, blah. So 100% I understand in Tito's defense why he would want that fight. Why would Chuck get out of retirement, take his fight is beyond me. It's sad if it, like, clearly it's probably for the money, but it's sad that it has to come to this, like, 8 years not active, and to come and take a fight like that against a guy who has been active. Yes, there's a story. You could sell some pay-per-views, blah, 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 but is it really necessary? Does he have that much to prove in his career? It's unfortunate.
And it sucks because, Tito, they have that rivalry. If this was someone we'd never heard of, yeah, it sucked to see him lose. But Tito, there's a story there. He's up 2-0. He was up 2-0 against Tito. And now we see him get knocked out like that. I don't want to say messes with his legacy a lot, but it does a little bit. It's an asterisk that people are going to look back on. And I feel like unless the money was that great, which it doesn't sound like it was, I don't see what was the point of taking this fight, especially for Chuck. Tito, I mean, come on. With a result like that, you can't argue. But I just don't think that made sense for Chuck.
100%, because at the end of the day, it's like there's a new wave of fans with social media. It's 2018, blah, blah, blah. Like the Conor McGregor era, you got a lot of new fans to the sport. But is that really the way you wanted those new fans to see you? Yeah, in the build-up, they would have seen a lot of his old stuff. But the fact that now the fight's over and it ended this way is it kind of sucks for these new fans to see Chuck Liddell like that, and they have no clue what he's done and how important and pivotal he was for this sport and the growth of this sport.
Well, you mentioned the build-up. I think the hardcore fans, I think we were, I don't want to say excited, but we were intrigued. The thing, we know this fight, we've seen it before, but I think if you're a casual fan, Oscar De La Hoya, I want to give him credit because he did some things right, but I feel like the actual build-up for the main event, I don't feel like it was very good, and he could have done a better job getting us excited, at least in my opinion.
Oh, definitely. You could tell that Oscar was a little bit out of his element, like, and is stuttering a little bit in the press conference. I mean, it is hard up there. Like, I'm not like he's been around the fight game. This is just different for him. So I don't want to necessarily criticize him, but he didn't look like the whole thing, like just the idea of the fight, people weren't too thrilled about. And then you got Oscar the Hoya up there, and he's kind of like stuttering, and he doesn't know that much about MMA himself. So uh, just the whole thing in general, kind of. A lot of kind of asterisks next to it, but I guess they went with it. They wanted to do it, and I guess out of curiosity, we did watch, and that was the point. Maybe they didn't get the numbers they wanted pay-per-view wise, but they still did. Was it 200,000 buys? I mean, it's kind of what a lot of UFC pay-per-views have been getting right now. Unfortunately, even the big fights you get, like, it's crazy to me that Darren Till, Tyron Woodley, after all that building up Darren Till, and he's a confident guy and he's charismatic, they did 150K buy. It's insane. So if that could do 200K buys, then that will validate the reason why they did it.
But I mean, I saw everybody criticizing him a lot. I think he did some things right. I mean, the card itself, it wasn't great, but I feel like the prelims were scattered with some names we recognize: Gleason, Tebow, Albert Morales. I think for that, he did a good job of putting some guys that we might be able to recognize. I just think, first of all, the pay, it turns out the prelim guys are paid really badly, which for first-time promotion and everything, I don't think that's too out of the ordinary. But I'm hoping that with all the stuff he's saying about pay, he's able to rectify that, because otherwise he's not going to be able to continue to build on this and give us better cards.
Definitely. I mean, for the guys that weren't, like a guy like Albert Morales, UFC vet, for him, it's probably because he knew that a lot of people will be watching because of Chuck and Tito. So that may have been his advantage. And they hope maybe down the line it'll be better pay. I just believe that a lot of these fighters are in limbo when they get cut from the bigger promotions and they don't really know where to go. They kind of get excited about any kind of opportunity that might have eyes, even if the pay doesn't match. Because we've seen a lot of guys leave the UFC, the pay's bad, the pay's bad. They go elsewhere and they're not even getting paid that much better. But everybody's got their reasons. For some people, it's respect. Some people like promotion. They want the money to be there as well, but it isn't always. It kind of depends. But I mean, it's the first time, first event. I'm expecting it to get better down the line, and I'm curious to see where he's going to go with this.
So one more final thing on this whole Chuck Tito thing. Do you think Tito Ortiz needs to retire? And maybe a little more obvious question, do you think Chuck Liddell's done, or do you think there's a scenario he might come back and it could potentially make sense?
I really hope Chuck Liddell doesn't come back like that, 150%. I hope he does not come back. He really has nothing left to prove. He's been medically suspended as expected. Why? Like, okay, maybe the Tito, he was up 2-0 against Tito and he found enough motivation to come back for that. But what else could they possibly, what other fight, skill level, and in terms of opponent, could they find him that has a big enough name? Because obviously Chuck's not going to fight if he's not going to get paid. So they're going to have to get him a guy that has a massive name where he could like sell pay-per-views with. And the Tito thing, yeah, there's a rivalry and all that, but I still see how it made so much more sense for Tito than it did Chuck. So 100% do not want to see Chuck Liddell come back. As for Tito, this is a high note, I guess. Like, for him, it meant a lot. Like, we look from the outside and be like, this fight is whatever, ridiculous, shouldn't have happened. Chuck isn't the same guy, but for Tito, clearly it meant a lot. You could see him in the post-fight celebration and stuff. It meant a lot. I'm sure, like, that clip of Chuck unloading on him, like, you see that everywhere. Like, even non-MMA stuff, like, they play that clip everywhere, and I'm sure that stuck with him for the longest time. So if that's his lasting memory and image of MMA, then I'm for it. Like, I wouldn't mind seeing Tito hang it up as well.
Yeah, I think Tito Ortiz, I think if he retired after Chael, he was fine. I think now is the perfect time to call it. He's got the victory over Chuck, a knockout. He could still fight. I didn't think he looked bad, but what's the point? You might as well stop when you're on top. I mean, 2 wins, 2 big names. I mean, rivalries that people were interested in. I think for him, it just doesn't make any sense to continue unless really there's a big paycheck. But I just don't see a scenario where you can top this ultimately.
Yeah, because you end up losing the next one. It doesn't sit well with you that you're retiring on a loss, and then it's like you sit out a year and then you drag it out and you try to come back for something that makes sense, or you try to convince people that it makes sense, and it's just this never-ending thing. So if you're fortunate enough to leave the sport on a high, then just leave the sport on a high.
All right, and so moving on, I know we got some questions from a few of the fans. Before we move too much into the show, I'm sure you have a few questions you saw that were good. Let's just read some off, and I guess we'll see what we have to say about them.
Let's do it. All right. We've got a question. I'm looking through my Instagram. Somebody's asking, will they ever host a UFC in Wales? I'll start off by saying, I mean, I see UFC Europe and their expansion and stuff. And I noticed with UFC Europe, it's not necessarily a fighter that comes from a specific place. We saw the Liverpool Darren Till thing. But now with Prague, it's not like there's a specific fighter they're building it around. So I think they have the reasons. I do believe Wales, we've got Brett Johns, Jack Marshman. We got a couple of guys. They could stack it with Scottish, English, Irish fighters. We could. I don't know what the UFC is thinking, and I'm sure the Welsh fans, I've heard them say how crazy. I mean, I feel like the Scottish fans say that the Irish fans say how crazy the crowd would be. So I believe them. I do believe that they could, you know, really, because they've held big events before, like in Cardiff and stuff. So I do believe that it could make sense. But I don't really specifically know the direction that the UFC go in terms of European events. It looks pretty random to me, not something specific, unless you've got like Connor when he was coming up in Dublin and then till Liverpool. But other than that, I just feel like they go, I don't know, depending where business is good.
Will they come to Wales? I'm not sure. I know they just announced today that they were coming to the Czech Republic. So I feel if they can go there, they could probably come to Wales. But I think unless we get a big breakout star, sort of like with Darren Till and Liverpool and everything, I just don't see where it sort of makes sense to come to Wales. And the way the UFC look at it, they're like, well, we can come to England and the Welsh people can come see the fights there. I just don't think it makes sense for the UFC to come to Wales right now. And I think that's how the UFC are seeing it. Unless we get a big star, of course, we could see him there. If they do it in Czech Republic, I don't see why they wouldn't consider it. But I haven't heard anything. I don't think anyone has. But it's not impossible. But I just don't see it happening anytime soon.
Same here. This is another one. What do you make of the new TV deal with ESPN?
Well, obviously, I'm not in the United States anymore, so it doesn't impact me a lot. But if I were to put myself back over there, I think I like it. I think it's going to help bring the sport mainstream because now ESPN is going to have the rights to show the highlights. I think we're going to see them on SportsCenter, more of these talk shows, even though they might not have the greatest opinions about it. I think it can help with the promotion. The only thing I have a problem with is that it's on ESPN Plus. So it's not going to be one of those things where you scroll through your TV and, oh, look, two guys punching each other. Let's watch it. So I think that hurts it a little bit. But overall, FS1, ESPN is a little bit bigger. So I don't see how this could be a bad thing for the UFC.
You know, I think people are going to be reluctant to pay a little bit. So in my opinion, maybe the first 5 to 10 ESPN events will suffer a little bit just because people, as soon as you put a price tag on anything, it could be just $1. People don't like that idea because it's kind of going out of the norm. Like FS1, like you said, you know, if you could just put it on TV, then that's great. So I think the first 10 events may suffer a little bit, but then we're eventually, I feel the UFC are going to have to do these big main events for these cards to make people buy, to make people subscribe. Then later on, they can go ahead with the weaker fight nights because at the end of the day, they have a lot of plans that don't fall through. So a lot of times, like they'll plan on 2 top 10 ranked guys to fight. It won't fall through. And then they're forced to push another card that people will be like, we're not going to pay for this, blah, blah, blah. But if you pay for the subscription, if they do start out strong with like great main events and fights that people will want to subscribe for, once they get those people subscribing, it's kind of like Fight Pass when it came along. Everyone's like, oh my God, we're not going to pay for that. And then down the line, a lot of people getting Fight Pass subscriptions. They were putting on featured Fight Pass prelim fights that intrigued people, that made people want to subscribe and stuff. So I think the key for the UFC is it will work if they put the right fights, at least in the first 5 to 10 shows. If they don't, then people are going to be reluctant until they do so. And nobody likes to get out of their habits. So eventually you will when you feel like it's worth it.
I saw someone mention for the ESPN deal that they might do some kind of package with Fight Pass and ESPN Plus. I think that'd be the best way to go. That way, you know that people, if they like fights, they see that it's more worth it and they can watch the events live. But I think no matter how much people complain about the price, if you like fights, if you're a hardcore fan, you're going to subscribe to it. I don't think I think people are going to complain about it, but I don't think they're going to stream it. I don't think they're going to watch it later. I think they're going to buy it. But like you mentioned about putting on the big main events and stuff, I think the the casual fans who they're trying to attract. I mean, us, the hardcore fans, we know that they're moving from FS1 to ESPN. So they have to make sure the casual fans find out too. And the best way to do that, like you mentioned, kick things off with a bang, give us the title fights, the trash talking, just really come out big. And then later on, you can start to shift down to smaller cards. But I think you need to attract people first, because once you subscribe, I don't think you're going to unsubscribe, especially if you enjoy basketball, football, these other sports, and you can take advantage of having ESPN Plus.
Definitely, and like you said, ESPN is massive. Like all of us as kids, as sports fans, ESPN is kind of the network. So for the UFC to be covered by ESPN, of course, it's huge, because then it'll attract so many outside eyes to the sport. And like I said, in the long run, it's kind of impossible for it to be a bad thing.
Yeah, all right. Well, I guess we said enough about that one. Is there another question?
There are a couple more. Let us see this one. Where do you think Sage Northcutt will end up?
All right. Well, we just saw a tweet. I don't know if you saw it not that long ago. With the president of one put something, Sage Northcutt, oh, thank you so much, Mr. Blah, blah. I don't want to say that's our answer, but it's looking increasingly likely that that's where he's going. But the interesting is Sage is currently in Italy, and I believe that Bellator are doing something over there. So it's not impossible we're going to see him in Bellator 1, but I don't see any reason for someone not to snap him up. I mean, he's, people are interested in him. He's got a funny character, which I think people are starting to enjoy now more than hate. But I think we're probably going to see him in 1. And I think it'd be a smart deal for them, and they'd be the best promotion along with Bellator to really bring him up and give interesting fights while also padding his record a little bit.
That's exactly what I say. Wait, am I hearing that? Are you hearing that? All right. It's gone now. With Sage, exactly. He's more like the product. Sage, doesn't matter who he's fighting. It's kind of like I can expect him to want to pad his record, like you said. He's going to be the main focus. So 1 could actually be a good place for him. The fans, they get great crowds. They get a lot of attention. Their streaming numbers are incredible. And now with DJ and Eddie Alvarez, and they're really making moves. So I do believe 1 would be a good place for him to kind of build his record and his resume. And eventually he'll come across guys that will be tough competition, but he's improving as well. I mean, he's also making strides in his game. It's just there's so much expectations from him. People expect him to go do like a karate kick knockout just because he's got that flashy style. And it's like he'll grow and he'll get that experience. But does he deserve the promotion? Sure, because we've seen how many eyes that he can get. Whether people want to hate on him or not, he does bring a lot of attention. He was getting paid a lot more than other people, which really upset people. And you get people in the rankings calling him out, and it's like, why? They purely want that fight just because of his name. So they're kind of admitting that he's got that name and they will get that attention when technically you should be looking up, but they're looking behind because they look at guys like Sage Northcutt and Mickey Gall. You got Mike Perry calling them out. And now you get why they're doing that, because they are getting a lot of attention, because you got to do that work as well in the fight game. It's not just being a good fighter. You got to put that effort. If you can do in the trash talk, you could be charismatic. You could have your own personality, whatever it is. You gotta do that work outside of the cage as well.
I think overall, Sage leaving the UFC, I think it's actually going to be a great thing for Sage. From what it sounds like he's going to get a nice paycheck. And I think in the UFC, he's always going to be fighting on the prelims, low on the main card. I think now's a great way for him to promote himself, make some more money, get more experience as well. I think, although some people are criticizing it, I think this might have been what was best for both parties, just so Sage can take advantage. I mean, if he's in 1, he's a big fish in a small pond. So I think this is the best thing for him, and even for the UFC. If they felt he was expensive and maybe they weren't the best to build him up, I think overall this was a positive thing, even though a lot of people are taking this like this is the end of Sage just because he's not in the UFC anymore.
Yeah, because I think we're feeling it's kind of the same effect we've been seeing, like Paige Van Zandt, they built her up and then she's lost a couple of fights. And it's like the competition level is the best in the UFC. That's the point. And eventually there's only so many opponents in the UFC that you can find that are going to have a small level of experience to match some of those fighters that they're trying to build up or potentially pad the record of. It's hard to pad a record in the UFC. It's just not the place. So that's why you see a lot of guys come from other promotions And then once they've so-called padded their record and you've got like 15-0 or 15-1 and then they come into the UFC and they can make waves and stuff, it's because they've built that experience. But it's hard to kind of start out with the UFC, kind of like with CM Punk. It's like, who are you going to find CM Punk to fight? I mean, they got a Mike Jackson who fights and also like does commentary analysis, but it's like, where are you going to find that? This is the UFC. It's the highest level. So it 100% makes sense for him to go somewhere like one.
Well, this thing with the UFC picking him up so early, I think this was a situation where they saw the the good looking guy, the fun personality. Of course, I don't think anybody looks like Sage at all in the UFC. This guy's incredibly muscular, athletic. They wanted to take advantage of that and sign him up, and I think they were hoping that they could build him up themselves. But they realized that's why we have LFA. That's why we have all these other promotions that are better at it. I think it's just the UFC were hoping to hold on to him, and now they realize he's very expensive, and it's going to take some time for him to get up there. He's still very young, especially in his career. So I think this is a good thing. I don't know if we'll see him back in the UFC, but I don't know if that's necessarily a bad thing either.
Yeah, I mean, he's 6-2 in the UFC at the end of the day. Like, that's a very solid record to have. I mean, there are a lot of guys, but then, of course, people jump in and argue about the level of competition he's fought and this and that. But that's the point I was making. Like, there's only so many fighters or fights that they could find for him to go up, because if you're going to put that much time into marketing somebody, they're going to have to win as well. And I just feel that the UFC found this a good opportunity. It's amicable at the end of the day. There's no like bad blood between them and Sage or anything like that, but they just felt like this was probably a good opportunity. And for him to say, I left the UFC at 6-2, not many people can say that. So I think both sides at the end of the day win.
Yeah, I think this is a very business decision, because if you think about it, you're paying him a lot of money, but he's not main eventing, and we don't know how he's drawing. Even though the fans are saying they're tuning in, we don't really know how he's drawing based on where they're putting him on the card. So I think as a business decision, even though we criticize them for the pay, I think they just didn't see how this was worth it. And I think that's all we can really say about this whole situation.
Yeah, drawing, like in terms of drawing, like he's going to have to fight somebody in the top 10 to put him in a main event. And that's where the problem comes. If they're going to give him that step up in competition, that's when it can warrant a main event of a fight night or a main card slot on pay-per-view. They kind of did the Fox card thing with Mickey Gall, which was a lot of fun. But then Mickey Gall ended up winning that fight. So it's like there's only so many high spots that they could give him and high coverage without the competition level getting higher.
All right. Well, I think that's all we have on that one. How many more questions do we have, do you think?
Just a couple more. I could get two more. Somebody asked, what does Volkanovski's future look like in the UFC? He's undefeated and has a fight against Chad Mendes. How do you see that fight going?
Well, I'll be talking to Alex Volkanovski hopefully soon, so hopefully we'll hear from him directly. But I'm very excited for him. I'm very excited about all these Australian fighters that we're seeing, especially coming up at this UFC Adelaide. I think we're getting some good names. He's a good fighter for sure. I think the last fight we saw him in, I don't remember if that was Jeremy Kennedy or Darren Elkins or something like that. But every time I'm watching him, I'm impressed by him. And him facing Chad Mendes is the ultimate test. This is what's going to decide, are we going to see him reach that next level? And if not, we'll see what happens. But, a strong wrestler like him, he's a rugby guy, so he's not afraid to, take the hits. I'm excited for it. As for who wins, I'm leaning Volkanovski, but I'm not 100% sure. The way the two styles are, this is a fight where I think anything can happen, especially with Chad Mendes' power. So I'm leaning Volkanovski, but I wouldn't be surprised if Chad Mendes found a way to take that fight.
The thing is, for Volkanovski, it's a fantastic spot for him to be in, because you get a lot of guys, up-and-coming guys that are begging for those high-ranked fights, those big names, and he's got it. And Chad Mendes is as seasoned as they get. Like, this guy has fought everybody, and he's so good. He's so talented. He came back in emphatic fashion when he knocked out Masvidal. So it's not one of those things where they're going to look at this fight, and if Volkanovski beats him, they're going to be like, oh, well, Chad, in my opinion, is still one of the top fighters. He did have those unfortunate. He had that war with Jose Aldo, and then he'd lost to Conor McGregor. He's taken a lot of damage, and you saw the way he got knocked out against Frankie Edgar, kind of an awkward knockout, and it kind of like the proof that he had taken a lot of damage in his last couple fights. Took some time off, comes back with a bang. So this fight for Volkanovski is huge, and Chad's a staple in the featherweight division. Everybody knows who Chad Mendes is in fight fans. So if he could beat Chad Mendes, it'll do wonders for his career. Of course, he's got a lot more to gain than Chad Mendes does, and stylistically, it's just a tough matchup for Volkanovski because Chad's obviously a fantastic wrestler. He's got massive power in his hands, and he's kind of good everywhere. So you get a win over a guy like Chad, it's huge. You got 100% got a new featherweight contender.
And I'm very excited for this one because I think even if Alex loses, it doesn't send him that far back because we know Chad Mendes. We know his resume. He's fought for the title a bunch of times. So I don't think a loss is really bad. So I think this is actually good matchmaking from the UFC, and I'm very excited to see what this fight's going to look like.
Definitely. Let's go to the last one. Another like kind of featherweight question. If Max beats Brian, do you think he'll stay at 145 and fight someone like Edgar, or do you think he'll go to 155, which seems to be more suitable weight division now with some big names, for example, Gaethje, Tony, and Connor? So yeah, do you think Max beats Brian, and do you think he stays at 45 or goes up to 55?
Do I think Max beats Brian? I think so. You know, watching his last couple of fights, Aldo and everybody, I'm 100% a believer in Max. I think if anyone can beat Ortega, it's him, especially with Ortega having a habit of losing the early fight only to snatch victory, not counting the Frankie Edgar fight. As far as he stays at 45, I think so. I think the only way we're going to get him at 155 is once you talk Conor McGregor. I think once you talk that rematch, you throw the money, then he'll say, okay, this is worth it for me. But I think so far he can stay at 145, continue to fight these names. I don't think we're going to see him against Moicano, but I think so far there are fights for him at 145. He's going to be able to put himself potentially as the GOAT of the featherweight division if he continues the way he's going. So I think it made sense for him to stay at 145. I don't really think there's a need for him to go to 155 unless they start talking Conor, but even Conor is not really in a position where fighting Max would make a whole lot of sense.
But do you think the whole champ thing has gotten everybody? Because you get a guy like Khabib, and he started out saying like, "I'm going to be about the legacy, and I'm going to defend the title, and I'm going to fight." And all of a sudden, he's talking about boxing Floyd Mayweather. I mean, and everyone is like looking at it like it's madness, right? Like everybody was mocking Conor, and now everybody wants to do the same thing. So do you think maybe if he beats Brian Ortega, like you said, like massive respect to Renato Moicano because that guy's a beast and he's a phenomenal fighter, but name value. It wouldn't do wonders for Max Holloway. So do you think a win over Ortega and maybe start thinking the whole champ thing? I get the feel like this is what everyone's doing. You get TJ Dillashaw. He's got Marlon Moraes, who's like a perfect top contender at 35. What more do you want the guy to do than to knock both guys out back to back in under a minute? You got a guy like Marlon Moraes, but then he's thinking about the flyweight title. So I do fear, I mean, I get it. This is prize fighting and everybody wants money and the champ thing is very attractive. It opens a lot of doors, but I wouldn't be surprised that if he beat Ortega, especially that he was kind of very briefly booked to fight Khabib, and Khabib's a superstar now. Like I was just watching PSG in Liverpool and they put the camera on him multiple times. Like I'm not used to that, like for MMA fighters to be getting that kind of attention. And the camera's on him multiple times. And I'm like, this is crazy. Like, he became a massive superstar after beating Conor McGregor, but then it's kind of like an effect that now anybody that fights Khabib is going to get a lot of attention and this and that. So I wouldn't be surprised if Max beat Brian and he started to look for the champ title, especially that 55. He does struggle to make 45, and 55 does seem suited for him as he gets older.
I think he could potentially call for the 155 fight, I think, for him, for his legacy. But I think at 155, we have a lot of contenders. We've got Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson. I think we've heard some rumblings that potentially Dustin Poirier and Tony Ferguson are booked. So I think if they do get booked, I could see them doing champ. But right now, both divisions have contenders. I think Khabib and they can build their resume. I don't think either man is going anywhere. I think they're going to be champion for a very long time. So could I see Max Holloway calling for a yes? But at the same time, I think he's a fighter's fighter. You know, he's taking every challenge we give him. Hey, fight Khabib, even though he's got an enormous weight cut in like 2 days. He says, okay. I just don't think I just don't think we're going to see that fight for a little while. I think maybe down the line potentially because they were booked. But I just don't see right now. I think both of them, their divisions, they have a lot of guys that are ready, even at 155. So unless those guys at 155 get booked, I just don't think first of all, I don't think it makes a lot of sense. And I don't really think we're going to see that. I mean, depending on how these next couple of months roll by for both divisions.
Oh, I agree. I hope we don't, because now I feel like the value of the champ thing has gone down because it's so easy for anybody. Like back in the day, like champ meant you've cleaned out your division. There's just, it all started back in the day with the like you had Anderson Silva when they were talking about him fighting George St. Pierre and stuff. Before it had value because you've cleaned out your division, and now it's like, what next? But now people are doing the whole champ thing when they've got tons of contenders waiting for them. And I just feel like it's not that, like, the value of the whole champ thing has gone down because they're allowing so many people to do it. And I just feel like it's kind of like the UFC just want to build big pay-per-views. It's kind of like that pressure of having these big pay-per-view sales. So now anybody that kind of asks for it, if you've got both sides that are down for it, they'll go for it. But in my opinion, it just kind of takes the value away of the whole champ thing, because now all of a sudden, like 10 years from now, we're going to have like 25 champs. And what's so special about it if you and 25 or 24 other people have done it? So I hope they don't, just like you said.
I think you mentioned the TJ Dillashaw super fight. Well, super fight, I use that lightly, but I think it's a completely different situation because Henry Cejudo doesn't have a division. I think Dana White came out yesterday and said, yeah, we're done. So the way the UFC booked it, and I don't like the way they did it, it's kind of one of those, TJ's going to go down there, beat the champion, collect that belt, end the division, and then move on with 135. So I don't love the way they're doing it, but I think it makes more sense because Henry Cejudo doesn't have a division. And at the same time, he's a champion who's just going to, get stripped and then, oh, okay, here you go, welcome to 135. So I think that fight makes a lot more sense. But Max Holloway versus I'd be interested to see it, but I just don't think, it doesn't really make any sense. They've got a lot on their plates, and they're both working on becoming the best ever in their division. So if I'm them, I'm focused on, of course, getting a paycheck, but trying to stay on that, becoming the best in their respective divisions and potentially reaching Mighty Mouse's record.
I agree. I mean, I'd love to see that because Max is kind of like the guy that Max and Tony Ferguson have been those two guys that have fought everybody in their way, and you look at you got to feel for a guy like Tony Ferguson who it just never seems enough. And he's fighting the toughest guys. Like he's fighting like top ranked guys that could have gotten title shots themselves, and they put everybody in Tony Ferguson's way, and somehow he keeps coming out on top. So I feel like it's crazy how after all this, he kind of trips on a wire and doesn't fight Khabib. And like, what kind of luck do you have to have? And then they put Anthony Pettis, a fight he has nothing to gain, faces adversity in that fight, gets knocked down and stuff, comes back 6 months after knee surgery, which is insane. Everybody said he's insane for doing that. And then all of a sudden they're going to put Poirier, which is what's projected in his way. Like, is there anyone who's had a tougher road to a title shot if he ever gets it? Than Tony Ferguson. It's crazy.
All right, so moving on to our next topic, we had the big news over the weekend as well as, of course, Israel Adesanya taking on Anderson Silva. I'm curious, what was your first reaction when you saw that get announced?
As a fan of Anderson Silva, like I grew up, that's the guy I grew up watching. Do I want to see him in this fight? No. For multiple reasons. You know what? Stylistically, it's not that bad of a fight for him. He's not going to get overpowered by Adesanya physically. Adesanya is not a strong grappler. Anderson, I feel like, still has it. Is he the same Anderson Silva? No. But does he still have it? Like, I watch him train and stuff. He can still move. Like, I wouldn't say that Anderson's completely done in the element of movement and stuff. But the idea is, he's saying Dana told him you win, you get a title shot. I mean, it's interesting. I don't know if that were to be the truth, or because things change. Of course, Dana can say something else could happen. But yeah, stylistically, it's not that bad for him. Just because they've got the same style of striking, the distance, the movement, the reaction time. But the difference is now Anderson is not as feared as he used to be. I feel like a lot of guys, when they used to face Anderson Silva, they were already defeated. Just mentally stepping in there, it's like, it's Anderson Silva, look what he's done to everybody else, and they freeze. Now Anderson doesn't have that same aura as he used to. So a guy like Israel Adesanya, a confident guy, he's not going to step in there and be like, oh my God, that's Anderson Silva. He's going to go in there to take his head off. So I feel in that regard, it's different. If it's a prime Anderson, whether people say they'll beat him and they'll have no problem, they get in there and it's different because they're seeing something different. But now Anderson has lost. He's not that invincible guy anymore. He's older. He's had problems with USADA. There isn't that element of fear when you fight Anderson Silva. And that's why I just, I see Israel Adesanya wanting that fight because Anderson's a name and he's a legend, someone he's looked up to. But I don't know. I don't know how I feel about that fight.
Yeah, I wasn't. Listen, I think Anderson Silva, I think he still has the fight IQ, and I think stylistically it's not that bad because it is a stand up in Israel. He's not Anthony Johnson. He's not going to kill him with the first punch. But I think the UFC are gambling a little bit. I mean, Anderson Silva, if he wins and he does get a title shot, he takes on Robert Whitaker. I don't think anybody's really looking for that fight. Even the hardcore fan, I don't think they'd really get excited for that one. And Israel, I mean, James Lynch had actually talked about this, but he said there's a chance we could get a boring fight out of this. And then, the same thing that happened to Kamaru Usman happens in this case. So I think the UFC are gambling a little bit, but from when I talked to Israel, it sounds like, he flew over to Adelaide to talk to Dana White. And I guess Dana wanted him to be an alternate, and he told him he wanted to fight Anderson Silva. That was the fight he wanted. And, he used the LeBron James, Michael Jordan comparison, which, of course, I can appreciate. But like I mentioned on Twitter, this is a young Cavs LeBron James and Michael Jordan on the Wizards. He's beating a name, but I don't think if he beats him, he beats the fighter. But I don't think the matchup is quite as bad as people are saying because Anderson Silva, he still got that IQ, and his stand-up used to be insane. I mean, the speed he used, the timing, I think everything's gone down a little bit, but I think he can still hang. I don't think we're going to see him, get knocked out in the first round, but I just don't see how this fight makes sense. I think you could have matched him up with a veteran. I mean, there were other options for Anderson, and even for Israel, if Israel didn't want to wait for the title shot, I just don't see how this was the best one they could have booked.
I think he should have just waited for Jacare because he was saying that the Jacare fight was the plan and Jacare wasn't going to be ready, and he understood why because Jacare had just gone through a war. Just wait for Jacare. I just felt like he should have waited for Jacare. That would have been a perfect #1 contender fight. An interesting challenge for him because Jacare obviously crazy ground game and jiu-jitsu and stuff. So he's got power as well, very durable as well. That, in my opinion, would have been perfect. And he wouldn't have had to wait that long because it's not like Jacare said he's going to be out until September or something. I think he just literally wanted time until March, April, which timeline-wise for Adesanya should have been fine as well. But I guess he's eager to get in there. He's riding the momentum. He feels fresh, didn't take any damage. And anytime you can jump in there and get an extra paycheck and this isn't that. So it is a gamble by the UFC because like you said, James was saying that it could be a chess match and it could be a little boring. And that's going to take away from Israel Adesanya's stock because he comes off of that win over Derek Brunson and it's flawless striking performance. And then if he goes in there and has kind of a staring contest with Anderson Silva where he'll beat him slightly on points, his stock goes down. So I get what you mean when you say it's a gamble. I agree.
I disagree a little bit with the Jacare fight because I think, everybody said Israel was next. Dana was like, wants you to be an alternate. I think it would have made more sense for him to just sit tight. If he wanted to get promoted, he's got his social media. He can still do interviews. I think the smartest thing would have been sit tight, focus on your game plan, take some time off, heal up. Because 4 fights 2018, that's a large pace. I think if I was him, I would have taken that time off and then eventually came back because he was next. And a fight against, hopefully for him, Robert Whitaker, I think that'd be huge, especially if they do it in New Zealand or even Australia. I think that would have made the most sense because if he loses to Anderson, I don't think it's going to happen. But if he does, then he lost everything. And if he fights Jacare, that's a tough fight. I mean, he's knocking out Chris Weidman. He's beating guys when people thought he was done. So I just don't see how that it would have made sense for him to take another fight. I think he should have just sat tight and then gotten the next shot and then properly promoted it.
I see what you mean, but the idea is that you've got champions don't fight that often. It's rare when you see a champion make a quick 3 to 4 month turnaround. They often sit out 6 to 7 months. If you count that from when Whitaker fights Gastelum, whoever wins, you're talking about Adesanya having to wait until around September. I don't see him doing that, especially when he's riding that momentum. He's excited to get back in there, which is why I think he jumped at the Anderson fight. Could it be an easier fight for him than Jacare? Sure, you could say that, maybe, depending on how you look at the fight. But yeah, like maybe if he gets that Anderson fight, same timeline, same event, if I'm not mistaken, as Whitaker and Gastelum, then it's perfect for him to have that same timeline of waiting for the winner, so that whoever happens to win between Whitaker and Gastelum, he would have just fought as well. And then if they fight in September, they fight in September. So I see why that option would be better for him than Jacare, because yeah, I see Jacare is he's so tough. He's not. No, it's never easy to beat a guy like Jacare.
But the one thing I do have to say about this fight is how disrespectful is this for Anderson? I mean, this fight, it couldn't have been more clear why they booked this. This is the Israel called for it. This is the stepping stone, the Kobe Bryant in that game where he announced his arrival, where he beat Michael Jordan on the Wizards. I mean, this is the ultimate, we beat that guy, moving him aside, and here I am. I think it's so disrespectful because even if Anderson does get the next shot, it wouldn't have made sense anyways. If he had fought a veteran, they wouldn't have said, "Oh, okay, you're close to a shot." So I think this is very disrespectful towards Anderson, especially his legacy. So I don't love the fight for that reason as well. I think if we remember Anderson as the guy who got knocked out by Israel and the guy who lost to Michael Bisping of all people, that's tough for his legacy. And I think the UFC could have done a little bit of a better job of, if he wants to stick around, giving him fights that make more sense and that bring intrigue as he's reaching the twilight of his career.
I agree, but I think because Anderson was saying in the beginning that he didn't want the fight, but then when they talked about a title shot, people want the title shot because it's a big payday. You get high billing on pay-per-view, headliner. Of course, Anderson would get a headliner. He'd get paid obviously more than he would if he were fighting a non-title fight. People in their latter years are just looking for the big paychecks. And when you look at the middleweight division, who is there that is a big name that Anderson? People keep throwing Nick Diaz, but when is Nick Diaz ever going to fight? And it's a rematch, and it's like everybody throws Nick Diaz's name as the guy to fight non-title but get a pay-per-view potentially or a high billing. But other than that, who is there for Anderson Silva to fight that will be worth it for him to make the money? As soon as they hear the potential and the possibility of a title fight, I think that's what he's thinking about right now, more than he is thinking about, oh, this is a kid that's kind of trying to take my spot or anything like that.
But I know we're all criticizing the fight. There's a lot of media criticizing it, but I know once the fighters start walking out, I know I'm going to be excited for this one. I think Anderson, I've always got this hope that we're going to see him come back in the front kicks and everything, but I know I'm going to be excited for this one regardless of whether I like the matchup or not. So I think fans are going to tune in for this one, and I think he should do pretty good numbers because Israel, he's on the come up. People know who he is, and he's doing an excellent job of marketing himself. I mean, every time I'm interviewing him, I'm blown away with just his presence, the way he talks. I mean, he's a guy who gets it. So this matchup could be a huge fan perspective, and if Israel wins, say in impressive fashion, which we know he can do, this could be big for him. But it's a gamble. It's a gamble regardless.
Yeah, definitely. A win for him would be huge regardless, because I feel like at this point Israel's become such a big star, and like I said, he marks himself so well. I feel like anybody he fights would take him that next step, even if it's somebody without a name. And now you got Anderson Silva, who's a legend. So definitely, if he wins that fight, it's good for him.
All right, so moving on to our next topic, we saw UFC Beijing this past weekend. For us in our time zone, at a reasonable time, I was, after lunch, just drinking my espresso, watching it on the couch at a reasonable hour, not 4 a.m. So I enjoyed this one. I enjoyed the time as well. Were you able to watch it live?
Yeah. Crazy to get up at 10 a.m. and watch the fights. I'm not used to that at all. So of course I was excited about that, and then very solid co-main and main as well. I think they did a good job. There were matchups that didn't fall through as well. So that card, the intention with this card was great. Heavyweights are always exciting. Alistair Overeem's a legend. Everybody was intrigued to see, is he going to be done if he loses to Pavlovich? And then Francis, there's this whole story of him losing 2 in a row. How is he doing mentally? Curtis Blades was the next top contender. So there are a lot of stories for fight night in Beijing, or just any of the cards they usually do in Asia. There's actually a lot of stories in this event, which made it actually a really good one.
And one of the stories that kind of flew under the radar for a lot of people was Rashad Coulter. I mean, this was a guy back against the wall. He dropped a new weight class, missed weight. He was in a foreign country, the first time in China from when I talked to him. And he was on a 3-fight losing streak, getting a shot at, staying in the UFC. I don't think for him, he couldn't have had a more important fight. So seeing him win that one, I was happy for him. And I think that was a pretty big storyline, at least for him. His job's on the line. He's getting a chance that not a lot of guys have. You go 0-3 in the UFC, getting that 4th fight. I mean, that's huge. And I don't think missing the weight was a big deal, especially with him. Heavyweight where you don't cut, and then all of a sudden you have to cut all the way down to 205. I think but I thought that was one of the interesting storylines, especially after I talked to him, as we headed into that event.
Definitely, because it's crazy when that fight was announced that Rashad was going to get another chance. There were so many people who were genuinely happy. Most times in a situation like that, they'll be like, how is this guy still in the UFC? He should be cut. This was one of the rare cases where a lot of people were genuinely happy for Rashad. They could tell that in his 3 losses, He was super entertaining in his fights and gave it his all. And he's just a good, passionate guy. Like, I felt like a lot of people were genuinely happy for him to get the chance and even happier for him to win. And you don't often see that. Most times when I'm announcing these fights, I see kind of a negative reaction from people. Like, what is, this guy should hang it up. He's too old. Or this guy's lost to me. How's he in the UFC? Blah, blah, blah. But he actually had a very positive reaction from the fans. So I was definitely happy for him.
Yeah, I mean, Rashad Coulter, I talked to him for the first time a little bit before the event. And I mean, this is a guy with an interesting story. He's a single father with 2 kids. He had recently taken up a part-time job, while he was injured. He's a genuinely good guy, and he's good at talking. So I see why the fans were there. And he's exciting, too. I mean, the 3 fights, and he didn't face anyone easy. Chase Sherman, Tai Tuivasa in that last fight as well. He was dealing with all those injuries. So I see why people were happy, and he's an exciting guy. So I hope for him he can get things down correctly at 205 in terms of making weight, and then I think it's going to be interesting to see who he gets next. I saw him do a poll. He was saying maybe Alan Crowder, threw some names out there, but the one that I liked was the Goka and Saki. I thought that'd be an interesting fight, and especially with Saki, people have kind of given up on him a little bit after the Roundtree fight. So I'm curious to see what they do next in that situation.
Definitely, that'll be a cool fight as well for Rashad, of course, because Saki's got the name. And like you said, I did sense as well that people fell off the Saki train when he lost to Khalil Roundtree, which is unfortunate. It's just the way the sport goes. You're only good as your last one, blah, blah, blah. He had a lot of hype coming in, and when you don't live up to that hype, especially that he had a bit of adversity in his UFC debut, he did end up winning by knockout, but people weren't entirely sold, and then he gets knocked down in the first round. So I think it would be good for both of them. Rashad, if he could get a win over a guy like Saki, that would be huge. And for Saki to go through a fight with a guy who's willing to stand and trade with you, if he could show that he can out-technique him because he comes from that striking background. So, yeah, it would be a lot of fun if they were to put that one together.
And so one of the storylines as well was, of course, that co-main event. Alistair Overeem, people were figuring out, is he going to be a gatekeeper, or are we going to see a new contender? And I remember as I'm watching the fight, I see him get wobbled a little bit from a punch, and I was like, oh, no, we're not going to see Alistair Overeem lose this one. Normally, he should be able to get it, and then eventually got his opponent down, got those punches. What were you thinking as 2 fighters were walking out and they were about to go at it?
I was thinking that Overeem has so much to lose in this fight, fighting an unknown, undefeated heavyweight. How did he accept this fight? I remember announcing the fight myself, and I'm just like, how is he accepting this fight? Why is he accepting this fight? Because Overeem's got a name. Like, it doesn't matter how much damage he's taken or how many losses. This guy's fought everybody, and he's fought for forever. He's got a name in this heavyweight division. So for him to take a fight like that is super risky. And honestly, I thought if he lost, is he done? Because unfortunately for Overeem, when he loses, he takes a lot of damage. The way he got knocked out against Blades was kind of scary. The way he got knocked out against Ngannou was scary. So you see that, and he's such a talented guy. He's such a talented striker, most talented striker in the heavyweight division, most diverse striker in the heavyweight division. He takes a fight like this. It's so risky, but for me, he had exactly the kind of performance that he needed to have. But I can only imagine how much pressure he was under.
Yeah, I mean, Alistair Overeem is a guy I enjoy watching. He's such a good technical striker. I just feel like he's not durable, and I don't think he's ever really been that durable in his career. But especially now, losing, especially the way he did to Francis, losing to Curtis, I think he really doesn't have a chin anymore. So Alistair Overeem, I'm not sure what's next for him. I don't think he's going to get a title shot. You look at that top 5, I think almost everyone's beaten him. He's asked for Derek Lewis, hot balls next. I don't mind that fight. I think it'd be fun. It's really going to be a Ken Lewis land, and is Alistair going to be able to be patient with him and outstrike him? So I think that fight makes sense, but I don't really see what's next for Alistair. I think, he doesn't really have a whole lot unless he wants to be a gatekeeper and just wait until he's kind of forced to retire. I don't really see what's next for him.
I think the Derek Lewis fight is perfect because Lewis obviously is he's done so well marketing himself outside of the cage, and he Overeem's a big name. To fight a guy like Derek Lewis with the whole, like, the way he called him out and everything like that, stylistically, is Lewis going to land a big bomb? Alistair's a technician. He's got those body kicks, and we know that Lewis doesn't take those very well. So I could see how Alistair could win, and I could see how Derek Lewis could win. It's definitely a fight that you could 100% put in a pay-per-view main card. 100%. Doesn't even need to headline a fight night. Stick him as a co-main even. Everybody gets excited over heavyweights. Derek Lewis didn't have the performance against Daniel Cormier, but at the end of the day, he's gone so many, like, his rise and increase in social media followers is insane. And Overeem's a legend, and he's coming off of this fantastic win. So actually, I like the fight, and I think they could stick it on any big pay-per-view.
So continuing with the heavyweight division, we of course saw our main event. I'm curious to know, what did you think of that stoppage? You know, a lot of people thought it was early. At first, I thought it was kind of early, but what did you think when you saw it live?
When I first saw it live, I thought it might have been a little bit early, but I understand. I'm okay with the stoppage because those follow-up punches from heavyweights could set your career back like 5 years. I'm not against it. A guy like Curtis Blades, because the heavyweight division in general, it's like I don't see Curtis Blades moving all the way back with this loss. Because at the end of the day, any top-ranked opponent he can fight, he's right back up there because he's a fresh face that hasn't fought a lot of those guys in the rankings. So if I'm Curtis Blades, the stoppage, yeah, I'm sure he'll be upset about it. But honest to God, like those couple follow-up shots could have sent him back way back. Like you could have talked about him being out for 6 to 8 months just because getting his brain to heal if he was knocked out unconscious. I'm not against it because I do feel like it was the beginning of the end. So I'm okay with the stoppage.
Yeah, what threw me off was at first I was sort of okay with it because you saw him slump over, he kept falling over, but as soon as the referee called it, he looks like he's lucid, he's talking to the referee, complaining. So I think that's what threw off a lot of fans. I don't think it's so much. I think if the referee had stopped it and he just slumped over, people would have said okay. But the fact that he was arguing, I think that's what kind of threw everybody off. And it threw me off too, because sometimes you kind of want to see the guy go out cold just to be sure. But at the same time, with a guy like France that hits that hard and a young guy like Curtis, there's no need to take extra damage if you're sure you're not going to win the fight anyways.
Yeah, in a weird way, I was kind of happy that he didn't take that extra damage because, like I said, like one win, he could be right back up there. It's really like it's like that in the heavyweight division, and like I said, there are a lot of guys he hasn't fought yet in the top 5. So there's still that Stipe fight, and if Cain Velasquez comes in the mix, you still got a lot of names that Curtis hasn't fought. So I feel like one more fight for him, somebody in the top 10 if he could win, because he's been so dominant and he's looked phenomenal. And maybe because he's not outspoken or doesn't have that big name that they weren't considering him. And with Daniel Cormier as champion looking for these big super fights anyway, it was going to be hard for anybody to get. I mean, Stipe didn't even get his rematch. So, yeah, I'm not like too upset. I get him, like he's in the fight and he'll be upset because he wants to continue. But I do feel that those follow-up shots were coming. Maybe it would have taken them, grabbed Francis' leg and landed a single leg. I don't know, but I'm not too mad about the stoppage.
Yeah, I think the loss, I think a lot of people saw it as a little bit devastating for him, but I don't think it is because I think even if he won the fight, I don't feel like he was getting the next title shot. I mean, you see Daniel Cormier, he wants to fight the Brock Lesnar, he wants those money fights, potentially even John Jones. So I don't even think he would have gotten a title shot anyways, and he would have had to risk his position with another fight. So I think, he's probably going to fight Stipe, probably going to fight, maybe even Hot Balls himself. So I don't think it's too devastating for him anyways. I think we'll see him right back out there, but the one thing I do want to mention is, though, Francis Ngannou, how important that was for him. I mean, we know you talked to him.
Yeah.
Fight, and even when I talked to him for the Derek Lewis fight, it really didn't feel like he was doing good mentally, dealing with the Stipe fight. I'm sure with the Derek Lewis fight on top of it. So I think this is actually really important for him, and it gives him a new contender because people, it sounded like they were done with him.
It's crazy because, like I said, in this sport, it's really unfortunate how people turn on you. And you had Dana White say what he said about him, and his coach kind of said a couple of things, and like to have to deal with all of that at once, going from the highest high to this, you can't not it can't not affect you, no matter who you are. And Francis, like when I was talking to him, like I could feel it, like the way he was opening up and talking about it and dealing with it mentally. And I spoke to his coach as well, and he was saying he was talking to a lot of people. It's interesting, and you have to be happy for him after everything. People writing him off, people calling him like overhyped and all that. And there's nothing worse than having Dana White, the president of the UFC, turn on you, especially after he was hyping him like Ford Escort or whatever he was calling him. So after all of that, to come out with a performance like that, typical Francis fashion, first round knockout, and all of a sudden everybody's back up on the train. Good for him. Does he get the next time? We still didn't see if he covered those holes, the cardio, the wrestling. We still didn't see that. If I'm Francis, I don't want anyone to ever see that. But of course, I'm sure he's training to to make sure that that never happens again. Because he was talking to me a lot about training his wrestling and his jiu-jitsu and guys that they've brought in. But this is what Francis does. This is why he's one of the stars of the heavyweight division. All of a sudden, everybody's excited about Francis Ngannou again.
Yeah, the funny thing is I talked to him right after the Overeem fight. You know, the Stipe, they announced it pretty quickly. So I talked to him right there in between when the Stipe fight was just announced. And then I talked to him before the Derek Lewis fight. And I feel like I was talking to two different fighters. You know, after Overeem, he was happy, you know, I'm going to go to Cameroon and build a gym. And, you know, everyone is so happy for me. It really seemed like he was on top of the world. And then before Derek Lewis, I feel like he was, I don't know if maybe I caught him that on a bad day or something, but he sounded grumpy and you know, he was getting a little bit emotional, and he switched to French while talking to me, and he was explaining that, you know, he felt like things weren't going well with people outside of his camp and his coaches. So I feel like more things happened than we realized after that Stipe fight. So, and especially the way Curtis was talking before this fight, it really sounded like he wanted to put that final stamp on Ngannou's, I don't want to say his top 5 status in the division, but maybe, you know, he would have never gotten a title shot again. So, you know, Francis is still a nice guy, and he's a good guy. So I don't think, you know, the win for him, I think it's great for the self-esteem, and especially for the fans to realize, you know, he's not going anywhere. It's the heavyweight division. So I thought that it meant more for Francis to win than it would have for Curtis, even if Curtis, you know, was a rematch and everything.
100%, I agree. Because like I said, I don't think Curtis was going to get that title shot. I think that was a fight to set him up to fight Stipe potentially. Which even then, if he beats Stipe, we don't even know if he would have gotten a title shot after that. So there's no guarantees at all with Curtis. And I felt like he felt that as well when I was asking him if he felt like he was going to get a title shot or anything like that. Everybody kind of knows where the heavyweight division is right now with Daniel Cormier as champion, not knowing if Cormier is going to retire and if he's going to continue fighting. He's not going to fight these guys. He kind of said it straight up, like, I'm not fighting these guys. I'm only going to fight the big fights. You know, it's Lesnar, John Jones, pretty much. So yeah, for where Francis was mentally and back-to-back losses, the way he lost first, kind of get gassing out and getting tired and beat up by Stipe, and then that fight with Derek Lewis that drove everybody insane. And it's like when you lose and things aren't going well for you, you kind of see people's true color, and people that were maybe supporting him stopped supporting him, people around him, I mean. So I'm sure, like, we don't even know everything, but I'm glad to see him back in Paris. He told me he's not even done with Vegas though, so because people got the impression that Vegas was some curse on him or something like that. They're like the France Ngannou or something like that. He's not done with Vegas. He'll go back there. The idea was he just felt that bouncing back and forth is what kind of distracted him, the media and the travel and all that. But he's not done with Vegas. Like he's gonna go back and do camps there in the future.
All right, and so we have a few more minutes here, so I just kind of wanted to touch on something. We saw John Jones do a lot of media with ESPN. I'm curious, did you get to see any of his interviews?
I did. The thing is, he knows what's coming with these interviews. He knows the questions he's going to get asked. I mean, he hasn't done media for a while, so everybody's got those questions that they want to ask him. And he was a bit taken by it. He was more comfortable in the Ariel interview, but that's just because he probably knows Ariel on a personal level. He's spoken to him before. And so, yeah, I think it was inevitable to be asked those questions. He seemed a little bit agitated by it. People were surprised by him saying that he still does have a smoke and a drink here and there and stuff. But you know what? I feel like Jones at this point is like, I'm done trying to create an image because people call BS on it. I'm just going to be me, like it or leave it. He has that confidence that he's the best. Now that the USADA situation, whole weird USADA situation is kind of cleared and he's going to fight. He feels at peace. You know, he's going to come back and do what he loves, prove that he's number one. He doesn't care. Like he'll be himself. It's not, I feel like he's not like trying to create this image that he wants people to believe anymore. He's just being himself. And I feel like people are respecting him more for that. Even if he says something like, oh, I still have a drink and a smoke here and there.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised by how much more genuine he was. One of the big criticism was even after the cocaine and everything, he's doing these interviews and it doesn't feel genuine. You know, he's just saying what he needs to say. And my mom actually used to follow UFC a little while ago, and that was always the thing she said about John is I don't feel like he's genuine. He doesn't mean it. So the quote that really where I was like, okay, John is done trying to be fake and look at me, I'm a Christian athlete, was when he was talking about the big mistake he made. He was like, you know, I ran into the pregnant lady. Normally people would just say, oh, I'm glad she's safe, the baby's safe and everything. John, being as fun as he is, he says, "Well, I paid her $1 million. She's fine now. Her life has changed." I don't think you say that unless you're really being genuine. You might think it, but to say that, you don't know how people are going to react to that, true or not. This is it's a bold risk, and I really feel like he's done caring about the way people see him. And even I still smoke, I still drink on the weekends. So what? I feel like he's finally being genuine, and he might lose some fans out of it, but I think some people might be able to appreciate it. But either way, you can't argue with the results in the cage. I mean, he really. I know I'm excited for this upcoming fight, but I was definitely surprised by just how genuine he is now, and I'm curious to see how it translates to his fans.
Oh, definitely. I think now he's kind of won people back. If they're going to do those press conferences, we see another one. I feel like I think he's won him back, and people are definitely excited to see him back. The UFC are happy to have him back, especially if you've seen the pay-per-views throughout this year, minus Conor McGregor. They haven't been the best. So to have a guy like Jon Jones back is definitely exciting for the fans. It's exciting for the UFC, and whether they're convinced by the whole USADA thing and how it went down doesn't matter, because he's scheduled to fight Alexander Gustafsson at the end of the year. It's a phenomenal fight, and everybody is excited that Jon Jones is back. Love him or hate him, they'll watch him.
And I have to give credit, of course, to he was on First Take, and that's where he was really getting grilled by Max Kellerman. I have to give him credit because, especially when you've got the fighter in person, some guys, they can be a little bit, oh, we're friends here, we're just going to talk about your fight. But I have to give him credit for asking those questions. And sure, you're probably not very satisfied with those quotes because he's just repeating the same thing every time. But, credit to Max for asking the questions. And Stephen A was playing the, oh, we're brothers, we're friends, so while Max will grill you, you and I were cool. So I think they played that well. And it's a good thing to ask them the questions because we can't pretend like it didn't happen. So, even though John's answers aren't good, I think it was important for people still to ask him about that because it's not going to go away just because we pretend it didn't happen.
Yeah, and you know what? It's easier for non-MMA guys to ask because people in the MMA media, and we can relate to this, it's like you don't want to burn bridges and ask those questions that are going to get people upset at you and stop talking to you. You want to ask the right questions, but sometimes it's crossing the line. For non-MMA media, it's easy for them to do that because they don't have that personal relationship. They're not involved and invested in the fight game like the rest of MMA media are. So I guess they can ask these ridiculous questions and like really push him. But like you said, like, he can't escape it. It's all out there. It's not like they're digging anything that we don't know about. They're just putting it right out there. And First Take is going to have viewers that aren't only your typical MMA fans. So they kind of need to know what's going on. It's part of the story, kind of like with the Conor Habib thing, people getting upset with Dana saying it's part of the story. So he can't escape it, and he'll have to talk about it.
Yeah, definitely touching on that MMA media thing. It would be tough enough getting an interview with John, but if the whole time we're grilling him about steroids, he's just going to hang up, tell us to go fuck ourselves. And there goes John, probably his management too. So it sucks for us because we should be able to ask the tough questions. Yeah. At the end of the day, as long as somebody's asking those questions, it's still good. I mean, we as media, we tend to be used sort of as PR, what do you think about the fight? Are you excited? How's your camp? So somebody has to be able to ask the tough questions, even if it's not us.
Exactly. And it's unfortunate. I'm sure you've had your own experiences. A lot of people are very sensitive in the fight game, and it takes me by surprise sometimes, even though if I'm not really asking anything crazy, you think you're not asking anything crazy, but it kind of hits a nerve with them. So I can only imagine the kind of questions Jon Jones was getting on First Take. But at the end of the day, I think he's accustomed to it. And more of it is going to come. The more media he does, the more it's going to come.
Yeah, the fighter sensitive thing, it's a story I haven't told a whole lot of people, but my first ever interview, I found that out the hard way, and ever since then I've had to be careful how I word stuff. But I had booked an interview through Bellator, and I was I was super nervous. I was sweating. I was like, oh my God, I don't even know why I'm doing this. This is stupid. And finally I get the fighter on the phone, the Bellator rep. All right, Lucas, go ahead. And we got the first couple questions, and then I don't know if maybe I should have worded better or anything, but he was coming off a big KO loss. And then I was like, did the knockout, how did it affect your confidence? And, I found out very quickly how that affected his confidence. We had like a 1 minute of silence. Then he talks to the rep. He's like, yo, Dan, man, fuck this guy. And he hangs up. And I was just sitting there.
Yeah.
Oh, man. Oh, so now, I'm careful. If you're coming off a loss, it's not, hey, so when you pick yourself up from the floor, no, it's, what did you learn from it? I learned the hard way that you have to be careful how you word it. And these guys are humans. I mean, you get knocked out, you're not going to be happy to talk about it. So, yeah, it's a tough way to find out, that's for sure.
Definitely, it kind of reminds me when Ariel was interviewing Rampage, and do you remember that interview when he was like coming off a knockout loss, and Rampage's like, "Why do you got to word it like that?" He's like, "I'm just stating the facts." So yeah, there is a certain style you learn eventually of how to word questions, just not to kind of get under somebody's skin because you never know how they're feeling. So yeah, it is kind of restrictive only because the intention isn't bad on our part. If it is, it's obvious when the intention's bad, if you're really trying to grow somebody. But sometimes like you could hit a nerve without even noticing, and then all of a sudden it gets really awkward and the person doesn't want to talk to you anymore.
Well, the thing is, if the fighter's coming off a loss, we ask that question. It's not like, hey, so you got knocked out. It's more like, what statement can you give so that the fans, they see that you're persevering through it, and how are you picking yourself back up from that? I mean, it's if you answer correctly, this could be a huge question. It could get you more fans because guys, they love yeah, I lost, but you know what, I'm back. And you saw the backlash with Ronda when she lost, and then Connor's like, yeah, all right, let's do it again. So, and you saw the two different ways. So I think that's something fighters should keep in the back of their minds when they get asked tough questions like that.
Definitely, we saw that with Dominic Cruz as well. The way when he lost to Cody, so I think people appreciate honesty and someone being genuine about what went down, because at the end of the day, it's factual what went down. It's not a kind of an opinionated thing of how it went down. But yeah.
So one last thing, of course, finishing off with John Jones. How do you see his fight with Alex going?
It's always a question of which kind of John Jones are we going to get. He's been training. But then again, I don't feel like with Gustafsson as well, he looked great against Teixeira. Was that his last fight against Teixeira?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think. No, I don't remember,
he's been out for a while. That's the funny thing. He's been quite inactive as well. And I don't necessarily think I don't know why I see a finish. I don't know from who, but I don't see it going the way it did the first time. I just feel like both of them have been away for a while from the cage. They're not confident. I feel it's different because they're rematching. And Gustafsson, I feel, has got his confidence back because in his last couple performances, I don't feel like it's been the Gustafsson, it was a Jan Blachowicz when Gustafsson beat him. He didn't look great. He was kind of getting lit up a little bit on the feet. Not that I don't think he's capable of standing with Blachowicz. I just feel like that time away, he's had a lot of time away from the cage. But with Jones, because it's a rematch and he's got that confidence from the first fight, he keeps looking back at that first fight. His knockout against Teixeira was phenomenal, those uppercuts in a row. With Jones, he's kind of like the undefeated, well, not Hamill, but he's the undefeated, untouched kind of fighter that has 2 wins, whether you want to debate them or not because of USADA, but he has 2 wins over the current dominant Daniel Cormier. So in a weird way, because they're rematching, I feel the confidence is there. But performance-wise, I don't know if we're going to see kind of what we saw the first fight. I don't know why I feel like they're not going to be as sharp as I'd expect them to be. I may be mistaken, and I hope I'm mistaken. But I just don't feel like we're going to get the sharpest Gustafsson and the sharpest John Jones at the same time in the cage. I feel like maybe one will be sharper than the other, but I just don't feel like we're going to get the best version. They've been away for too long. They haven't looked as good as they have. Well, Jones obviously against Daniel Cormier, but he's been away for so long. He's dealt with so much outside of the cage. And Gustafsson, he's been away for a while as well. So that's why I honestly don't know which version of them we're going to see.
Yeah, it's weird because John Jones, we saw him come back against OSP after a long layoff, and everybody was like, yeah. But then he comes back after a long layoff against Daniel Cormier and knocks him out. So I'm expecting the best version of John Jones. That's what I'm hoping for. I think it's going to be different in that I'm expecting a more dominant fight from John. And if anything, I think he could probably pull off a submission. Not necessarily known for that huge knockout power, but I think he can get it done, and probably by finish. That's what but either way, I'm hoping we get a great fight because both these men, they've done it before and they're capable of doing it again a second time.
Yeah, and I'm looking at Gustafsson now. Teixeira's his last fight, and that's May of 2017.
Yeah.
That's a long layoff. And I do feel because when Jones fought him the first time, it was the first time he fights somebody long and that could strike like him. It was a different look for him. And I think it took him by surprise. Now that he's gone through that, fight with, and he's fought OSP, another long guy as well. I feel like now that he's gone through those stylistic matchups with that high ability to strike and stuff, I do feel that maybe I'd give the edge to John Jones, but we'll see. I don't think it'll be as close as the first. I just don't see it being a 5-round, super, super close war like it was the first time.
All right, well, that wraps up our first ever MMA show. Farah, thank you so much for joining me. We hope you guys enjoyed it. You guys can find me, of course, on Twitter at Grandsire MMA, and that's really the only place, unless you want to find me on Instagram as well. And Farah, where can we find you?
On Twitter, Farah_Hannoun. On Facebook, Farah Hannoun MMA. On Instagram at UFC News Alerts, or my other Instagram at Farah Hannoun.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, the people who did watch live, people watching it afterwards, and we'll be back at you next week.
All right. Thanks, guys.